This episode is sponsored by a company who has truly found a solution to an age-old problem, and that is Karna bunker gear. One of the most prevalent conversations in the fire service is should we or should we not train in our bunker gear? Now, the answer to both is yes. As most of us are aware, the carcinogens from structure fires, of which there are over 260 that are dangerous to human health, not to mention the PFAS and other chemicals that are within our gear from the manufacturing process, are factors that we obviously want to minimize. Now, the other side of the coin is that we do need to train in our gear. There is no way to acclimatize the heat retention and lack of mobility than to actually wear the gear. So seeing this problem himself, firefighter and exercise physiologist Ryan Conley developed a carcinogen-free gear at a much lower cost that can be used in non-IDLH atmosphere and training that does not require puncture or tear resistance. Now, as someone who always trained in gear myself throughout my career, I wish this technology was around then. And I got to test it personally while coaching my tactical athlete class a few weeks ago, and can testify that it not only simulates the heat retention of frontline gear, but also the lack of mobility, which is imperative at operating at a high level on the fireground. Now, some additional benefits include being able to doff the gear when you do get banged out for a call, increasing the lifespan of your frontline bunker gear, and then also public education. Think of the number of times that we allow, for example, school children to wear our gear when it's infused with all these carcinogens. So there are so many real-world applications for a fraction of the cost of IDLH-rated bunker gear. So if you want to hear the whole story behind this, listen to my conversation with Ryan Conley on episode 1175 of the Behind the Shield podcast, or go to karnabunkergear.com. Welcome to the Behind the Shield podcast. As always, my name's James Gearing, and this week it is my absolute honor to welcome on the show veteran British firefighter, fire service fitness advisor, and the man behind Fitness for the Frontline, Mark Pearce. Now, in this conversation, we discuss a host of topics, from his own journey into the fire service, the initial fitness standards, training the tactical athlete, hiring standards and injury prevention, the importance of rest and recovery, and so much more. Now, before we get to this incredible conversation, as I say every week, please just take a moment. Go to whichever app you listen to this on, subscribe to the show, leave feedback, and leave a rating. Every single 5-star rating truly does elevate this podcast, therefore making it easier for others to find. And this is a free library of almost 1,200 episodes now. So all I ask in return is that you help share these incredible men and women's stories so I can get them to every single person on planet Earth who needs to hear them. So with that being said, I introduce to you Mark Pearce. Enjoy. Well, Mark, I want to start by saying thank you so much for taking the time and coming on the Behind the Shield podcast today.
No problem. Thanks a lot for inviting me. I'm looking forward to it.
So where on planet Earth are we finding you this afternoon?
So I'm in the beautiful sunny place of South Derbyshire, right in the middle of England. So it's, although I work in Staffordshire, it's like the neighbouring sort of county, but in beautiful South Derbyshire.
Brilliant. Well, let's start at the very beginning of your timeline then. So tell me where you were born and tell me a little bit about your family dynamic, what your parents did, how many siblings.
Okay, cool. So it seems like many years ago now, on a warm winter's night. So I was born in Southampton. So although I live in the Midlands now, I'm from which is right at the bottom of England. So I was born, mum, dad, older brother. Me, mum and dad, quite a mixed sort of background. My dad was in the army before I was born, but he sort of went straight from school, and he's from like a military sort of like a background, but in the majority of the life, especially as I sort of knew him, he was a factory worker, so worked sort of long shifts, long hours, but sort of proper shifts, not like firefighter shifts, as in, sort of half an hour break in the morning, half an hour break in the afternoon, that type of thing. My mum worked in the school as a teaching assistant. So yeah, it was a pretty good sort of childhood. Really, couldn't really complain. Didn't really ask for we didn't sort of need for much really, and my parents are quite sort of trusting parents. My mum especially, she's quite a cool mum really. And my brother, so he's 4 years older than me, so he lives a bit further up in the Midlands, weirdly. So we've both sort of moved away from the south. He's a writer, aspiring sort of writer at the moment. So he lives with his wife up north. Yep. So I live now in the Midlands for about 20 years now, with my wife, 2 dogs, and 2 kids.
Brilliant. With your dad, if I think about the generation kind of before us, the Falklands War is the only conflict I think of when it comes to British that really pops to mind. Did he deploy in any combat when he was serving?
Not so much Falklands, but he was in the island. So he was like the early 70s. So he went to Ireland a lot, a lot at the peak of the IRA and things like that. It's very frustrating because my parents have both passed now. So when I was younger, I obviously sort of knew my dad was in the army. We talked a little bit about it, but not much. When you're a kid, you're doing other things. The older I get, I would love to now to sort of spend hours with him and pick his brains, because he was never arrogant about it. He never really told stories, as most sort of military people don't. They're not the loudest people in the room. Yet when you really sort of dig down on what they've seen and dealt with, you think, Jesus, how are you still a functioning bloke? Because I remember there's I don't know if it was a big film in America, but there was a film called 71. And it's basically set about the conflict in Ireland. And I told my dad about it, and it's loosely based on the truth. And I started to say a couple of things that was in the film, and he said, "Oh yeah, I saw something like that. Oh yeah, I saw a mate of mine got sort of blew up down an alley and things like that." And I was sort of spat out in the street, and you think, "What? You've never mentioned this before?" And it was so just sort of blasé, but yeah. So, but he never spoke about it much. But like I say, like the older I get now, I would have loved to find out what he actually got up to.
It's so interesting. I've had people on here that were, regular military, SAS, on that side talking about Northern Ireland. I've had people, talking about growing up in Belfast and the other side of it. And it's just so mad to me. It really is. I've said this. People say, "Oh, do you being English? Do you hate the Welsh? Do you hate the Scottish? Do you hate the Irish?" And I'm like, no. We live on 2 tiny rocks in the middle of the sea. Yeah. We're all the same people, but how that got to the point, and we obviously understand, some of the rough history of the occupation and, where we are today, but that you have, whatever you want to call all 4 countries, let's just, say the United Isles of, the sea, literally fighting each other. And even, the Welsh borders and the Scottish borders, that people that are such close proximity would be set against each other for, really for people that live in castles to get more money and power.
Yeah, and it's quite sort of scary how sort of quickly it snowballs as well. So again, I don't know the ins and outs of the history, but it just, especially the island thing, it just seemed to escalate and escalate. And and I suppose it happens sort of now. You dig down, you think it's like sort of good versus evil, but it's never that sort of black and white. There's always a politics reason or a money reason, or and now there's a lot of oil sort of talk and things like that. There isn't like the good versus bad kind of battle, and that's that's the weird thing about the military. I mean, I admire anyone who goes in there. To be fair, it's something I've never done and could never do. But then I always wonder if they feel, if like when they are sort of sent out to places, you think, do you actually know what you're fighting for? And I think it's such a blurred line now of why are we going over to this sort of remote country in the middle of nowhere to try and solve a conflict that we're essentially picking a side, and it makes me feel a bit uncomfortable. So it'd be interesting to see if people within the military sort of feel the same. Or
yeah, I know. I mean, I've had so many veterans on the show, and especially Iraq. Well, why were we there? Because they were lied to. They were blatantly lied to. We know that. Not only was it kind of coupled into the response to 9/11, 2 completely different countries, but also the weapons of mass destruction and some of these other things. These men that lost friends over there, and lost allied forces over there that they worked alongside, and saw, Iraqis killed all over this conflict. And then they come, 20 years later, they really are left with the question of what was it all for? And I totally get it. And they absolutely made a difference in the micro areas when they were protecting people in certain communities. But the mission that they were told, the cups moved, and all of a sudden it wasn't the same anymore. And I think that we talk from a mental health, moral injury point of view, that must be crushing to a soldier.
Yeah, and I don't know how you'd, because I always just sort of hear stories of people who when they come out of that environment, and then they're sort of down sort of Tesco's and they're doing the shopping and taking the kids to school. To go from that to that, it must how your brain copes, because you get into a, and we experience it in the fire service in a microcosm. I'm not comparing it to the military at all, but when you're on a job, no matter how sort of bad it is, you're in sort of work zone, and you don't really see the bodies and the dead people and that, because you've got a job to do, and you're there for like an hour or 2 or 3 hours or whatever. But then you come back, and it's only when you sort of sat down with a brew and you start to think, Jesus Christ, that was a dangerous one. Oh Jesus, that family's had their lives sort of turned inside out. But it's that times a million in the military, I imagine, because it's whole countries and regions and areas that, and as you say, like because most military battles or conflicts, if you like, they tend to start with a plan, and the Prime Minister or the President will come out and say, yeah, we got a 2-year plan, 3-year plan, then we're going to withdraw after this many years. I don't think there's been one that's been as tidy as that. And even when they've left, it's still in the same state. So there never seems to be it's not like, it sounds like a good old sort of classic, like the World Wars, but that was like, it was a bit more sort of black and white then. And then there was a winner and but the knock on of that, I don't think wars happen like that anymore. It just seems to be a lot more sort of messy and blurred and very uncomfortable sort of viewing from the outside.
I saw a statistic the other day. The Russians have now lost 1.2 million people in the conflict so far. And again, you think about how many Russian, let's say young men, woke up and went, you know what I'd love to do today is invade Ukraine. I would imagine very, very, very few. So this is what's so tragic, is when some of these people make these decisions, and these decisions don't involve their own children going to war. We see this, history repeats itself. Ireland, Gaza, Ukraine. I mean, over and over and over again, this cycle of division and war. And as you said, and it never ends. And I think, even with the Bible, I was talking to some people recently, I'm not super religious, but to me, I feel like the Old Testament is like, here's how we used to do it, and it didn't fucking work because everyone kept dying. So here's Jesus, love, compassion, kindness, community, service. Try that instead. I think you're going to have a lot more luck with that than continuously torturing and killing each other.
Yeah, exactly. I just think that the reach is a lot sort of smaller. I think, just sort of look after your friends, your family, your community, and go from there. I don't like this sort of massive outreach all the time. I don't know. I don't know the ins and outs of it. To be honest, I'm not a big fan of the news in terms of, because it just depresses me, so I try and keep out of it as much as possible. I don't tend to there's not many things I get really sort of passionate on one side of the fence, because it's the information that we're fed as well. Because I'm very sort of distrustful of the media and things like that. And even no matter how sort of black and white it looks like on the BBC or whatever, I'm thinking, yeah, but if you watch sort of something else, they've got the like the other side and the other view. So I think what we're told is very selective. And as you mentioned, like the stuff with Tony Blair and the weapons of mass destruction for years and years. And it turned out it was a massive lie, and the whole thing was built on it. And we were told that they were this big sort of scary country with all these sort of bombs. And it turns out it wasn't that at all. And you think, I don't know. So I get a bit sort of like is it an ostrich that sticks its head in the sand? Is it, I'm a bit sort of like, I'll sort of deal with it when it affects me, but I just prefer to look after myself and my own than sort of look too far afield.
Yeah. Well, I think that's it. They say you want to change the world, start at home, but we've also got to look at history and go, okay, this same thing keeps happening. The next time someone rises up and said they're going to be the leader of everyone else, and here's what you need to do, maybe we need to, as you said, focus on our communities and stop picking fights with other countries.
Yeah, definitely.
All right. Well, then what about sports and exercise? What were you playing and doing school age?
So it's a bit sort of strange at school, because I was really overweight at school. But I played a lot of sport at the same time. So I was never sort of like the kid at the back. I played a lot of football, a bit of tennis and basketball and things like that. But I was really shy, and whether that was sort of linked to me weight, I don't know. But I was really shy. But I was in a lot of semi-cool groups, if you like, always at the back. I was never at the forefront or anything. So I played a lot of sport, was okay for football, but I think my nerves and me shyness to sort of held me back. So I played for the odd team here and there, but not really consistently. So I was fitter than I looked, which is pretty much the same as now, really, because I'm not one of those with a six pack and things like that, but I can handle myself in the gym and things. But yeah, so I love sport in terms of sort of watching it, and was obsessed with, as with most kids sort of growing up in the late 80s and 90s, obsessed with football. And me and my brother used to collect all the stickers and watch every game that was on and things like that. But it was more of a love of sport, and it was something. And we sort of touched on it a bit sort of later about my career now. But I was obsessed with the idea of being a footballer, and I like my sort of music as well. So I was obsessed with the idea of not being famous, but fascinated by the persona of people. And I used to sort of read autobiographies and stuff like that, and to know what it was like and the good side and bad side of all that sort of side of it. I found it all quite fascinating. And jumping right the way forward, like I say, we'll catch up a minute, but where I am now in like going down, I admire a lot of the academic side of work and what I do, and that's what I sort of envy now, and that's what I look at for people who are doing all these like research sort of projects and working at universities. In a weird way, I've got the same thing how I used to sort of look at footballers, and I have to look now, I think, oh, I'd love to make a difference like that. I'd love to get involved in that. So I've always been on the outside sort of looking in. I've never had an interest of being, I was never been the loudest person in the room and things like that, and it's never really sort of interested me. But at the same time, I've been sort of fascinated by people who were like that and the super talented people in the world. I find that really interesting to watch someone be really good at something.
Have you, by any chance, watched the show Welcome to Wrexham?
Yes, well, I watched the first couple of series, but yeah.
I was blown away. So I grew up, my dad wasn't a big football fan. We watched football, but he certainly didn't have a team. We didn't ever go see, live events. And even when I was little, Bath was winning all the rugby games, but we never really watched that either. Yeah. And so, fast forward now, I'm 51 and I'm watching this show. I've been binge watching it. I started season 1, I don't know, like a week ago.
Yeah.
But it was such a beautiful insight into what football used to mean before, like you said, the fame and the $1 million, salaries and all that stuff, or pound salaries, where that would be, miners or steel workers or whatever it was, all going to the game, having a pint, going to watch the game and be able to kind of let off some steam. And then how that factored into, the industry in that village or town as well. So I've been blown away how well they've portrayed that human element, on a game that's so prestigious now, and there's so much money in it, and it's owned by billionaires, most of the teams. But at its root, for them to be able to show the history and take this small team that still has that kind of element about it, and then help them elevate. I mean, it's one of the best things I've seen on television for a while. And they've kept, Ryan and Rob, these big Hollywood A-listers. Yes, they're in it, of course, but I love the way that they haven't put themselves front and center. They put the team and the town front and center.
Yeah. I was just going to say that, although it's about sort of football and they're in it, they're not really the point of it. It's to follow the characters. And I love the way that they pick the same fans and follow them sort of week in, week out. Because there's another one, it's probably 10 years ago, called Sunderland Till I Die. And obviously it was about sort of Sunderland. It's on Netflix. And that was, again, exactly the same. So I think that was the predecessor to Welcome to Wrexham. But it would sort of follow the fans who were getting ready in the morning on Saturday morning and getting on the coach and getting on the bus or getting the train, and they're all, as you say, they're all sort of working class, and there's loads of sort of banter and sense of humor and things like that. And you forget what it means to people, because it is obsessive. It is I mean, the older I've got sort of less interested, and I think it's because of what you said. I think because it's a business now, and it's all about the footballers, and they're all like brands, and I just don't get the same sort of love on it. And whether it's got other things, obviously with kids and jobs and everything, sort of gets in the way. That sounds horrible, but you know what I mean? It's like your priorities change, but it's just not the same. And I like to look back and watch all the old sort of 90s games, and when they're being sort of interviewed onto TV, sort of like the good old days. But whether every generation does the same, I don't know. So whether the kids now in 20, 30 years time are going to look back, oh, do you remember this and do you remember that? But it's just too shiny now, too corporate, and too, they're not owned by a local sort of businessman anymore. They're owned by, as you say, sort of trillionaires around the country. Who it's a business opportunity, really. It's not for the love of the club, and it has changed. I think that's a reflection in society, though. I think there's sort of so much now it's just too and whether that's down to social media and things like that, without sort of sound like an old git, but it just everything is too sort of temporary and shiny and all for show. And look how great my life is, where there isn't any harm in sort of struggling or seeing somebody, you know, sort of achieves something that's kind of small for them but still sort of really impressive.
I think there's a yearning to go back to that. I've said this many times. It's kind of one of the themes that's just common at the moment. When we were young, we had Blue Peter, we had John Craven's Newsround, we had Comic Relief, we had Live Aid. You know, we had people doing nice things to other people, and some of them were, you know, several continents away, but we cared as a shared humanity. And I agree, we've got, I've said this recently a lot, you know, the monopoly, having all the money has been put on the pedestal. Like in the business world, that's the thing. To take all the money from everyone else, you're the winner. Instead of, you know, as we know, what works well around the world is each village has its own butcher and baker and, you know, et cetera, et cetera. This young generation from the technology, I'm seeing that they are going into the trades because they're seeing that education, you know, unless you want to be a doctor or a lawyer or something, a lot of these tracks don't result in any real, you know, guarantee of a job. And then there's a romanticizing of our childhood. So cassettes and records and, you know, the music and the films and getting back to that. So I think that this whole thing, I'm excited because I think it's going to collapse in a good way. Like the greed for having all the money to be, you know, everyone looking at you on social media, whatever, and people just going back to the community that really is at the core of being a human being.
Yes, it does seem more like a bit of a phase now. So a lot of kids are drawn in by it, but then they soon sort of come out the other side. I do think it's down to your upbringing as well. So like my daughter, for example, she really loved, she loves Harry Styles and all that kind of still, but she really likes her old sort of music as well, her music that her mum used to listen to, and a lot when we were sort of growing up. So there definitely a coolness in the retro, in the nostalgic, and I do think that hopefully is a thing that kind of sticks around, because for the same of us growing up, we like the odd sort of, it was kind of cool to like the Who and the Jam and the Beatles or whatever, and this is the equivalent now, so they might be sort of listening to kind of like the Cure or the Smiths or something like that, so it does sort of knock on. I think my biggest fear is the comparison, where everyone only puts on like the best bit about their life, and then so everyone sort of has a glance at it and think that's normal, and think, you know, to kind of look, whether it's to look a particular way or earn an amount of money or drive the best car, and that's starting to rub off, I think, kids, because they want the best car. They can't have a banger, for example, for their first car and bum around for a couple of years. They want the really nice cars with all the bells and whistles on, and that's what kind of, I think, there's no sort of working for stuff anymore, where because me and the missus had a conversation the other day about sort of work and that as well. So when we went to school, then you might have gone to college, and I did go to uni sort of many years ago, but it wasn't sort of forced on me. But then as soon as I finished whatever education, it was just to get a job. And you at first thought, it wasn't a conversation with your parents, or you didn't sort of do a little part-time job here. It was just, I'm going to get any kind of job I can to earn money, because my next sort of stage is moving out. And it was like sort of natural, when now it seems more normal for kids to do sort of little part-time jobs and sort of stay at home a little bit longer. Half of it is the house prices, I know, because they're sort of like ridiculous. But I don't know, there doesn't seem to be that drive to be sort of self-sufficient anymore, because we've all gone a bit nice, and we're all quite happy to live in our sort of mid-20s, late 20s with our parents. When I thought, well, when did that happen? Because I wanted to get out as soon as possible, and I had good parents. So do you know what I mean? So it's that kind of self-sufficiency, I think, that a lot of young people don't really strive for nowadays.
Yeah, well, both my boys are chomping at the bit. One left. He was a little bit older. He was about 20. But my 18-year-old was trying to go to college. It just didn't make any sense on paper to do the first 2 years in a different state. But the moment he's finished the second year, he's out. So he's right. that's the ideal thing, isn't it? But what I think is silly though is if you live in the same town and you're not married or have kids, you know, then don't move out and pay a crazy amount for a 1-bedroom flat. You know, because I think you see some of the cultures that have the multi-generational households, and it makes a lot more sense financially. But yeah, I mean, if you're going to have a partner and children, of course, then absolutely you need your own space, or you're going to somewhere else, you know, in the country or overseas. And yeah, I think that's another another good one. But the other side of the coin, I think, is, immediately flinging them out when they're 18 and they live down
Yeah, I
the road.
wasn't. Yeah,
No, but there are people that do that. Oh, as soon as they
yeah,
turn, I'm going
yeah,
to kick them out. So yeah, but
yeah.
financially now you just put them in debt from the moment they started
It's only
working, and
going to
they're on a
set them
back foot the
backwards.
rest of their
Yeah,
life. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. You can't account for sort of life experience. I like that. I don't think there's. I don't know. On the, I think there like there isn't a right way and there isn't a wrong way. Well, there is a wrong way, obviously, but in terms of sort of life experience, because it's like my lad. He's at uni at the moment, and he's got an opportunity to kind of take a year out and go and play sort of rugby in sort of Australia and New Zealand, but he's not going. And it's like inside, I'm like, obviously it's his choice. I can't make it, but I think he's never going to get that opportunity again. And it's nice and controlled, and it'll be sort of subsidised, and it'll be arranged sort of through the uni. And he was like, no, I'm fine. I've got a girlfriend. I'm here. Do you know what I mean? He's quite happy. But inside, I'm like, oh my God, I would have sort of killed for that at that age.
Mm-hmm.
So, but it's not really not that he's going to get much out of it and work-wise or anything, but the life experience of learning on your own and being in new sort of surroundings and having to cope. You know what I mean? You can't rely on your parents. As much as it kills me and would scare the life out of me, and I'd hate it every day he's not here. On the same time, the amount of sort of like a value. So I think there is a bit of value and a bit of distress, but not too much. Like I say, I'm not saying to kick every sort of kid out as soon as they're sort of 16. That's it, out the door. I'm not commuting that.
Yeah, no, I agree completely. What about career aspirations? Were you thinking of the fire service when you were still in school, or was there something else in your mind?
No, not at all. Never even crossed my mind. So my path was sort of media. So as in terms of behind the camera. So my sort of dream job at school would have been writing and producing of like sort of films and TV. That was 100% probably really from a young age is what I wanted to do. And that's what I did at uni. So my degree isn't anything to do what I'm doing now. It's a media and film degree. And that was my plan. And then I moved up into the Midlands with my ex-partner. We had a child, and then her family, like her dad was a firefighter. So we started to talk a little bit about the job and things like that. So I thought I'll go for it as I'm up here. So it wasn't really not in a blasé way, but because I spoke to a lot of people and they said, oh yeah, I tried sort of 3 or 4 times to get in, sometimes more. I thought I'll go for it. I won't get in, and then I'll just sort of learn from it and then move on. And I don't know if that helped because I was sort of super relaxed, so expecting to kind of not get the job. I got in first time, which is amazing. And then so I've never looked back since then. But no, it wasn't a thing at school really. It wasn't really even sort of mentioned. I was much more. I had this sort of dream because, like I say, I was obsessed with I liked the world of sort of films and TV, but I wasn't sort of brave enough to be in front of the camera or anything like that. So, but to be in that world, to be part of a team, so that's the sort of crossover I can sense with the fire service. Is obviously it is a big team, it is a big family, and when I start to think about it, maybe that's what I was craving, and that's what I wanted to be part of, was like a team and achieving sort of something. So not directly, but there is a few sort of links.
So what was the kind of front door experience for you as far as expectations from fitness levels and, if any mental health conversations?
Mental health wasn't mentioned at all. And I'm coming up to, well, it's this year, I'll be sort of 20 years in the fire service, and I'd probably say the last 10 years it's become sort of normal. So even in the job, it's not been talked about that much. Fitness, again, it wasn't prescriptive. There wasn't so it's 2006 I joined. So there obviously was the internet and things like that, but it wasn't. Everything now is like you can sort yourself out online. It wasn't like you can get sort of training plans and things like that without sort of looking for them. So it wasn't. It was talked about, but in a general sort of sense, can you pick heavy stuff up and move, and can you run a little bit? But it was all related to the tests themselves. So there wasn't much pre-support. There was like a DVD, used to be like a yellow sort of DVD. It's famous in the UK, but it was like the recruitment sort of like test. It was probably 10 years before that it was made. And that was the target. So there wasn't anything about ongoing and longevity and remaining injury-free and things like that, which I'm sort of super passionate about now. It was more about sort of passing the test and getting, and then the job makes you fit. It was kind of assumed. It was like an old-fashioned sort of type of fitness. It wasn't very sort of technical and sports sciencey. But but it's something, although as I was saying earlier about being overweight, I was reasonably fit. So a picture of me, you'd think, how does he run? How does he sort of run at all? But I've been sort of always been sort of fitter than I look. So I never really sort of struggled with that. Once I got in the job, I was like, because you'd start with these like big hairy ass sort of firemen, excuse me for swearing,
No, you're
that
fine.
would kind of, oh, sorry, that were kind of, again, they weren't sort of ripped, but they were like, had sort of farmer strength, sort of daddy strength, I call it, you know what I mean? Sort of, and I was 23 when I joined, 24, so I hadn't really had much sort of life experience and things like that. So I really sort of worked hard because I thought I just don't want to embarrass them. I don't want to look an idiot in front of them. So although I had good sort of, well, I say good, average sort of CV fitness, I could do the job without any issues. That was when I started to kick, because it being part of that team and not wanting to let anyone down and thinking of the worst case of scenarios in a job, I thought there's no way I'm going to sort of look an idiot like in front of them. So that's when I kicked on. But that came from within. And so whether it would have been more of an issue if you come in with a bit of a lazy attitude, then you get more of a kick up the arse and you get kind of shoved, where I didn't really kind of need that, because I was quite a nervous, a younger bloke. So I was really keen to not ever be told you're not working hard enough or you're not doing enough. So I'd go the other extreme and I'd sort of work my ass off. Wasn't perfect by any means. Obviously made sort of a load of mistakes and things, but I did try.
What did the fitness test look like, the one to get hired in the first place?
Well, this is interesting. So considering my job now and what I preach now, we fell in a bit of an anomaly, if that's a word. So I started in the September, I think, and there was a course in the July, but before that, there wasn't any recruitment for a few years. So there was a bit of a gap, and I don't know if this is the reason why, but there wasn't actually a fitness test, believe it or not. So we had the JRTs, the job-related tests, and obviously you had the fireground test when you do a timed little circuit with the fireground equipment, but there was no bleep test. There was no sort of chest-to-chest motor test or anything like that then. So, but then about a year or so after that, then they brought in the bleep test. So we fell right in the middle. So whether that worked out perfectly for me, because I've never been a fan of the bleep test, but yeah, so which is quite sort of scary to kind of look at it. But there was no one who wouldn't have passed a fitness test, if that makes sense. It didn't mean the standards kind of have dropped. But it's kind of crazy when I speak to a lot of people and they say, oh yeah, the standards have dropped now. And in the back of my head, I'm thinking, I didn't even do a fitness test sort of 20 years ago. So at least there's a standard now.
So what are you hearing, though, about that? I mean, obviously the British Fire Service is a national service, unlike here, where you could have one town that holds their people to a super high level and then the neighboring town has no standard whatsoever. Over the last 20 years, when there is a fitness test in place, what has been the conversation of that being lowered? And if that's the case, why?
Well, it's a massive conversation. So the last sort of 3 or 4 years, it's kind of, I've spoke to loads of academics and people in and out of the job and all that. So the technical answer, the standards haven't been dropped. It's a myth. What's happened is, so back in the day, 30, 40, 50 years ago, again, there was no sort of fitness test other than unofficial sort of log runs and things like that. But it was based on there was no sort of science behind it. I'm not saying that they weren't sort of fitter, so I don't want to get down that argument, is, whether they were or whether they weren't, but there was no sort of science behind it. The first fitness test, the paper was, I think, 2017-ish, no, 2014, 2015. I should have got the exact date. Apologies if anyone is listening and they're sort of screaming down. But the point is, it was only in the 2010s anyway. And that standard is a national standard, and it's worked out on your VO2 max, which is 42.3. So although you say like we're a national service, we are. However, it's exactly the same as what you described. So although you've got to reach that target, how you reach that target or how you're assessed that you're reaching that target can vary from county to county, which is absolutely crazy. So we're Staffordshire, and we're on neighbouring services, West Mids, for example, West Midlands. And you can get into the services in completely different ways, even though you could sort of cross a road and be in the opposite county. So there's a handful of tests that mean that you can meet that, ranging from like a breath by breath, sort of like like the gas analysis kind of test on a treadmill. We don't have that in our services, and not many services do, but that's the only sort of true way to get it, ranging up to sort of a treadmill sort of walking tests and bleep tests and things like that. And it's all sort of worked out what the equivalent is. So, but everyone, male, female, whether you're 18 or 64 or whatever, you have to reach that standard to get into the job in the fire service. So there's no firefighter unless they started pre-tests. I'll put that. But even then, even if they started pre-test, the annual test, which every service does in some form or another, you have to reach that standard. So there shouldn't be any firefighter in the country who's not at that minimum standard. This is when it gets a bit sort of nerdy, so apologies if I'm boring you. But
no, jump in.
But that minimum standard has been worked out by academics and people in the service as well, from fitness advisors to watch managers, station managers. It was a big sort of paper that was made to where this 42.3 came from, and it was worked out, or whatever the phrase is, that the physiological effect on a human. So male, female, age irrelevant. You need a VO2 max to be safe on the fire ground and reduce the chance of cardiac arrest. So that's the minimum standard that you need. It doesn't obviously sort of guarantee your safety, because if you smoke and you drink and you're overweight, etc. But if you can hit that, that means you're at the minimum that it reduces your standard, basically to kind of not have a heart attack on the fire ground. So that's the standard that everyone's at. So when people say it's been sort of lowered for females and things like that, it's not true at all. All that's happened is it's been standardized, yes, but that minimum standard is for everyone, and everyone has to hit that. If somebody knows of an individual in a service who's skipped a test or out of date or anything like that, then that's like a local issue, but that isn't a service decision to let more sort of females in, for example. That's just an error in the working out. And there are a lot of brigades. I say a lot. There's a few brigades. I don't think it's thrown them under the bus, but sort of London for Fire Brigade, because they're so huge, they're playing a bit of catch up. So because they've got thousands and thousands, we've got about 550 operational for firefighters in our county. So we're quite small, and they've got thousands and thousands. So like the logistics can sometimes cause an issue to make sure everyone's in date, but they still have to get in at that standard, if all that waffle makes sense.
No, it does. It does completely. So firstly, you guys are held to an annual standard. That's something that is, you use the word anomaly. If someone who has a punitive fitness test in America would be an anomaly. And you use the word minimum standards. When we go to Fire Academy in Florida, as here, you usually put yourself through school. Yeah, it's only up north of where they'll actually take people really, as civilians. A lot of us, we have to go to school first and then try and get hired. But our certification is called minimum standards. So it's so ironic, because we label, this is the shittest you should ever be your entire life. Coming out of the academy, that's the worst you should be, minimum standards. And yet there's no annual fitness test. So what happens is you get these people kind of like, some of the blokes at the pub with the beer bellies talking about how they used to be so good at football when they were in school. It's the same thing. You've got a 15-year firefighter who's now obese, talking about how they were their fittest in the fire academy because they weren't held to a standard. Now, of course, there are some contributing factors, from mental health to, the impact of sleep deprivation on our hormones and our ability to keep the weight off. But ultimately, if you're held from at a standard from the front door from the beginning, you would catch that slide, you'd nip it in the bud. Even if someone was sliding a bit, you'd be able to help them, get them back on their feet. And now they're only 1 year behind, not 15, 20 years behind. So the fact that you even have that test is phenomenal. Is it punitive? If you don't meet the VO2 max, what are the actions that are taken?
Yes. So obviously at the beginning, if you don't meet that standard, then you don't get in, basically. And most sort of services only recruit sort of once a year. So it does mean that you're sort of put back in a year and you've got to wait until sort of next year. There's not many sort of second chances. Some brigades do a follow-up kind of tests and things like that. But sort of generally, if you don't meet the recruitment standard, then you can't get in. In terms of the annual test, it varies a little bit service to service. So the official line is that if you don't hit that standard, then you're off the run, and then some follow-up sort of actions can take place. But while you're investigating it and while you're supporting them back and doing a follow-up test, like, you're off the run. There are the odd sort of services who have misread the advice and guidance, and they have I think it's because they called it a green, amber, and gold, green, amber, and red sort of standard. So if you're in the green, then obviously you're great, and then you just put back in the pot and you're tested a year later. If you're below a certain standard of the test in the red, then you're off the run. You might go to occupational health to make sure there's no underlying issues, and then you have a support plan. What's confused thing is this amber area. So some brigades, if someone falls in this amber area, so I'd say, then they remain on the run while they do like a secondary test, or while they do a bit of sort of like a follow up. That's kind of incorrect. You should be off. If you're not at the minimum standard, you're putting yourself at risk. The service is putting that individual at risk, and the service is at risk, because obviously they've got a responsibility. So on the sort of legal side, so there is a bit of a grey area where some people are being on the run when it's proven that they're not at that standard while they investigate. Now the fear is obviously if they have a heart attack the next day, a good a lawyer would go, well, why did you keep him on the run when you sort of knew he didn't hit the standard? Just because he's in this amber zone, the minimum standard is 42.3. So yes, you are essentially taken off the run, or you should be sort of taken off the run, and then the support plan or whatever it is sort of follows up.
What really angers me is there is no downside to fitness standards. Now, bear it in mind, let's say they're in at the front door, you're expecting them, so there's no one even saying it's unfair. The people that have been on for X amount of time, and then you put this in, of course, there needs to be an on-ramp of, a year, 2 years to allow people to get back to where they need to be, because you just put that standard in. But that aside, from a performance point of view, if we're talking about, extreme events in the UK fire service, to say, oh, it's okay, we don't need to hold you a standard, and now you're asked to go up to the 24th floor of the Grenfell Tower to get a family out of an apartment building after you force the door, that requires a high level of athleticism. If you're asked to go down into the tunnels after the 7/7 bombing and start pulling people out, that requires a high level of athleticism. So this job isn't for everyone. Full stop. Let's just make that clear. I've always said I would be a horrible accountant. I'm terrible with numbers. So everyone has their place. But on the flip side, as you said, with cardiac arrest, it's also about longevity and wellness, and make sure our people go home, and not just go home, but when they retire, have a long and healthy retirement. So the opposition to fitness standards really just turns my stomach, because you can't point to any element of a fitness standard and say, oh yeah, but that's not fair. It's fair from a performance point of view, and it's fair for taking care of your people and their longevity point of view.
Yeah, 100%. And that's just something that the longer I've been in this, so I've been in this role for just under 4 years, I've got more confident in being a bit sort of blunter and saying that kind of thing to people. Like when people fail, which in our brigade is tiny amount, I've got to say. But it's kind of, what did you expect? You surely there's a sense of responsibility that you need to be sort of fitter than the average person across the road. You don't have to be an athlete by any means, but you have to be sort of fitter than the average bloke. And the answer is always, yeah, I know. But then you think, well, how do you get fitter? Do you think you're going to wake up one day or take a pill and it's just going to happen sort of naturally, or you just sort of grunt through it? You have to work at being fit. And there isn't a way around that. There isn't a cheat code for that. So the self-worth, having the responsibility, and it sounds sort of cheesy of the badge and things like that. I don't mean for the love of your county, but we should be proud to be sort of for firefighters. There's hundreds and thousands of people who would die to be a firefighter, and that's why we had like 1,800 people apply for 15 jobs and things like that. So you've got to take responsibility and don't think the job is done as soon as you get in. Exactly as you said, the standard that we're tested to, although it's great, and like we're tested annually, I'm constantly saying that's the minimum. That means you literally don't have a heart attack when you get off the truck. That's all that is doing. That's not saying, because even like the run out the flight of the stairs, and I say to people, there are a lot of people who could run up the flight of stairs absolutely fine, but you've got to forget, you might have to perform a technical task while you're up there. So if you're not, you might be blowing out your ass thinking, right, I've done it, I've climbed the 10 flight of stairs. If it's going to, all the performance sort of level and your cognitive behaviour of when you're for fatigue is so important. We're going to have to save lives when you get to that point as well. So it's not about sort of just getting to the job. It's about sort of performing when you're at the job, which I think a lot of people forget. All they think is like the distance, or I'm strong enough to pick up sort of that bit of kit. Yeah, that's great. But can you pick up that bit of kit at a funny angle when you're bent over a car, and obviously sort of manual handling sort of goes out the window and things like that. So it's thinking about the job rather than just thinking I've got to do the bare minimum.
Yeah, absolutely. And you got to train for the worst case scenario. Where I worked, this last one, protected theme parks, but my station, there was a 30-story hotel next to us. And to do what we call a high-rise strip here, so take everything that you'd need to ascend to get to the standpipe. You got hose on your back, you got two spare cylinders, and you got a tool. That's 100 pounds of gear, and I was 168 pounds, so that's almost double my body weight.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, excuse me. Almost. I told you I was terrible with numbers. Almost half my body weight, more than half my body weight. There we go. Jesus, I am terrible. So now you're climbing 30 stories. And then, like you said, then you get to the fire floor. Now it's time to actually go to work. So, I'm a huge believer in the word tactical athlete. Do we do athletic stuff on a daily basis? Maybe not. Many of us are pumping blood pressure cuffs and doing very non-heroic shit on some of these shifts. But when you get those calls, whether it's 0 to 100 and you're just fighting a single story fire, or whether you're ascending 30 floors with 100 pounds of gear, that 0 to 100, you are asked to do, something that arguably very, very few people in the entire nation would be capable of doing. So you do need to be held at a high standard.
Yeah, 100%. And like on top of that, I always think of thinking of your oppo as well, because it's not always about can I sort of drag my mate out, can I pick up this bit of kit? It's if I collapse, am I in a reasonable sort of body composition state that my mate can pull me out? So there's a bit of responsibility for him, because he could end up, if you're really overweight and you have a collapse, you're going to give him a heart attack, or he's going to get sort of trapped or run out of air, because he's going to sort of half sort of kill himself trying to drag you out, and that because that's part of the bond. No matter what the books say and do this and do that, you're going to sort of try your best. So there's a responsibility for your team as well, and making sure that you're in a good enough sort of shape that you could be sort of rescued. Which I know sounds a crazy way of looking at it, but sometimes it's kind of changing the way that people view things. It's not all about just sort of running for the sake of it. And even, it's going off tangent a little bit, but a lot of people say that being sort of tested to a VO2 max standard isn't relevant to the job. And it's really hard to put into words when you try and say 100% it is, because every kind of movement we do is related to VO2 max. I saw a great sort of podcast the other day with a bloke called Peter Attia. He's American, and he's an amazing bloke, because he sort of breaks stuff super clever, a lot cleverer than a lot of people, but he kind of breaks it down. And he said, with your VO2 max, us having a conversation now, we're probably in a VO2 max of about sort of 6 or something. And when you get up and walk up the stairs, it might be 10 to 15. So everything that we do is sort of staggered up. As we get older, over the age of, I can't remember if you said 30 or 40, but it's relatively young, it's kind of drops by a certain percent every single year. So that means if we're training now to 42.3, I'm 40, how old am I? I'm 44 sort of this year. So I'm in that sort of bracket. If I don't train, I'm at 42.3 now. But if I did exactly the same as what I'm doing now sort of next year, my VO2 max is going to drop sort of naturally because of age. So I need to address that and work harder. So that's why there is an argument to say it is unfair on females, and the older you get, because it's harder for them to maintain a certain VO2 max, which is correct. However, if that's the minimum VO2 max you need to be safe on the fire ground, there's no getting around that. If you can't reach that, you might have to work harder to get there, but that's what you need to be safe on the fire ground. So if you can't reach that, as blunt as it sounds, then maybe you need to be off the run, or you need to work harder. There's no getting away. There's no getting away from that sort of minimum standard, if that makes sense.
No, it does. Actually, that's a really interesting way of looking at it. When you become a firefighter, your lens shouldn't be, oh, I'm a firefighter at 19. It should be, I need to make sure I'm a firefighter still at 49. And what am I going to do?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not wearing the uniform anymore, but I still train as though I am, because you never know. You might come across a car crash. You might have to, God forbid, protect your family, whatever it is. Your physicality is important, male, female, whatever, and to use ages or genders as an excuse because, as you said, we're aging. Well, yeah, we're in a profession that ages. So either A, go sit behind a desk, which is not what I was dreaming of in the fire academy, or yeah, understand that you're going to have to put the work in. And realistically, what's going to happen is you're going to smash the VO2 level when you're 20. And yeah, when you're 45, it's going to take a little bit more work. But if you never stop training back to those fitness standards, if you're held to a high standard and just every week you just keep doing the thing that needs to be done, you won't have this sharp drop off. And even towards the twilight of your career, those will still be attainable, because we all know those men and women in the fire service who are still smashing it in their 50s. So, it just takes diligence, just takes hard work.
Yeah, 100% right. And that's what I'm always sort of saying to people. It's not about sort of training like an athlete. It's just about sort of keeping sort of ticking over and being consistent with it, and kind of pushing yourself as much as you can. But it's just about sort of doing it sort of day in, day out for 10 to 20, 30 years. I mean, we've got a few for firefighters in their early 60s. And they're amazing, and they pass the fitness test fine, and it's all, I'm not saying it's, whether that's sort of right or wrong is another issue, but like there isn't any issue sort of with them, and they're amazing. So when you get to someone in their early 30s who's moaning about the fitness test, I'm like, you cannot moan when there's a 64-year-old who's passing the test with flying colours. Exactly. You can't moan at 31. You know what I mean? So there isn't any excuse, and that's all it is sort of consistency. And it sounds an obvious thing to say, but the only people who moan about the test and pretend it's for like a moral sort of reason about the relevance of the test or this and that are the people who struggle with it. And you think, well, you don't ever get a fit person moaning about the tests. And I always think, well, that's as obvious as it sounds. What does that mean? You know what I mean? You're using it as an excuse because you can't be bothered to put in the work in. I'm not saying for everyone, obviously, there might be injuries, there might be underlying issues, and age can catch up with people, even kind of no matter sort of what they do. But the harshness about it, that is unlucky, and I do feel sorry for you, and you could work your ass off in a rehab or whatever. But if you can't reach that standard, it doesn't mean we should lower the standard for you, because that's only putting you at risk, putting you at more risk.
Absolutely. Something popped into my head, and it's a recent conversation, but I'm watching Welcome to Wrexham. I'm watching it on Hulu, which is an app here where you just get bombarded with adverts, and it's brutal. And ironically, you're watching, this show about this community and these fit athletes, and then you keep going to these drug commercials, because over here, that's what you get bombarded with.
Right.
And so many of them are those GLP ones, the weight loss pills. And it just kind of hit me that you have people that are deconditioned that also are carrying more body weight. And now these pills work. So now they're slim. And I think, in the examples, especially where gastric bypass was used, like extreme obesity, I think these pills have a place. I really do. But the problem is, if you got your average person who's a little heavy, they start taking these, and now they want to be a cop or a firefighter. They haven't put any of the work in. Again, assuming that they haven't put any of the work in, you can lose a lot of weight just from the medication itself. So now they go into these tests, they don't have the physical resilience, and they don't have the mental resilience of the suffering that is, working out's hard, and some of these workouts you're throwing up, or, whatever, pain cave you put yourself in periodically. That's the whole point. It's supposed to be hard to prepare yourself for the crucible of a fire academy, a police academy, etc. So it'll be interesting to see, as this whole GLP-1 revolution happens, how many seemingly fit looking people show up that maybe then can't actually do the physical test because they haven't put the actual work in.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that's in every sort of walk of life as well. Because I think it's super scary that I think it's the education behind it. Because as you say, they've definitely got a place, because they were invented for a reason with people with diabetes, more morbidly obese sort of people. And it's going to save the NHS over here, obviously, sort of more money if we saw that out sort of sooner rather than late in life. However, when you get sort of 20-year-olds taking it, when you think all they have to do is do a bit of exercise or eat better, because so when I do the annual test, for example, I don't like people being too kind of lean and skinny either. So I say to people, when I give advice on, not that I'm a fan of BMI, it's a load of rubbish, but in terms of sort of body fat percentage, I'd prefer someone who's a little bit higher, not sort of dangerously high, but with something a bit about them that they can carry their sort of body weight around, and like they're half sort of decent in the gym or in whatever sort of for fitness they like, but working on the worst case scenario again, if they're on their hands and knees and like a building is collapsing on them, I'd want somebody with a bit of something about them rather than someone who's like a 2% sort of body fat percentage, who, you know, any sort of strong a breeze and they're going to snap. But they might be able to sort of run a marathon, which is great, but that's not going to help you in the job. So there's not only the fitness side that they won't have, but it's the I don't know even what the word is, but like the durability of someone. Because it's not a pretty job. There is a lot of mauling, and when you're sort of ridding out after a fire and you're pulling bits down and you're crawling in these like sort of weird places and covered in muck and things like that, being sort of mega skinny is not going to help you. So yeah, I do think there's going to be a knock-on. I think there's going to be a knock-on in society. I hate it when you see sort of teenagers and that are on it, because I think what a lot of people forget as well, all it does is make you not hungry. So all it's doing is not making you eat. It doesn't. So as soon as you come off it, it doesn't mean as soon as you come off it that I'm going to eat sort of 5 sort of fruit and veg a day and I'm going to be really healthy and I know about sort of healthy fats and all that. It doesn't give you. It doesn't implant a chip in your brain. So all you're going to do is go back to kind of what you were, or you're going to stay on for longer, which is exactly as you say. It's not a long-term solution. So I think it's super, super dangerous, and we'll see what happens. I hope it gets sort of picked up though, because we do in our service like a health check. So it's not only the test, and we do their blood pressure and body sort of metrics and things like that. So I'm hoping that it would be obvious, in which case, you know, in our brigade, we wouldn't have any, if they're at risk or going to put someone else at risk, then we would sort of take them off the run. I just hope that other brigades do a little bit more and other brigades do even less. So there will be a few that sort of slip through the net, but we'll never know. But I hope it gets sort of picked up.
Like so many pills, I was just talking to a psychiatrist the other day about the use of antidepressants and some of the other, you know, psychiatric drugs. And he had a great analogy. He said, you know, it's that they're used just to stabilize. And I think this is the case for a lot of drugs, whether you're on, you know, a drug for hypertension, you know, diabetes, whatever it is, unless it's not like type 1, where seemingly there don't seem to be any cures for that. But let's say you're borderline type 2 diabetic. You know, you could take something to get your sugar down, but the goal is to change your exercise habits, change your diet to where you're not diabetic anymore. The same with hypertension. And even with these psych meds, you know, if you are suicidal, then yeah, they can stabilize you, but then you have to find the treatments that work to stop you, you know, to unravel your mental health and get you back to where you're healthy again. And you don't need those meds and you come off those meds. I see an application with these GLP-1s. You know, you've got someone who is heavier. If it is given an exit strategy, okay, we're going to use this for X amount of months. We're going to get you down to this body weight. We're going to ramp, you know, start very deliberately increasing your exercise. We're not going to throw you into a, you know, Murph on your first day, but we got to create a habit of better eating, of better gym habits. And let's get you eating the foods that are nutritional, even though your portions are smaller. So as you come off and your appetite goes up, you're already enjoying the right food. I think that's fine. But what worries me in America, that's not how doctors do it. Most of the doctors are like, oh, you've got high blood pressure, you're going to be on this the rest of your life. You're depressed, you're going to be on this the rest of your life. And there is no, let's use this just as a bridge to get you to holistically not need it anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think sort of generally there's a rush to get them on the tablets in the first place as well. So why not try some of the holistic things first? It just seems, and I know that, you know, all I can say is in England and the NHS, I know everyone is kind of under pressure. You have sort of 10 minutes slots, and they're always sort of running behind and things like that. So I can see why they think, right, just sort of take this sort of tablet next. You know what I mean? And that gives sort of GPs a bad name. I don't mean that at all, but there's a lot of pressure from their side. It just seems the amount of people who are on sort of drugs and they haven't tried anything else. And I think, but that, again, whether that's a national problem or it sounds like it's an international problem, of education for GPs, where they should get strength and conditioning sort of coaches and nutritionists and things like that to educate the GPs to say there are other things you can try. So you use an example. A couple of years ago, I saw a documentary. I think it was about, I don't know if it was blood pressure or diabetes, but they got a selection of about sort of 10 people, range of ages, and some were really obese and some of all different sort of shapes, sizes and sexes. And they did a test of putting them on a dead, as you said, a dead sort of basic, like an exercise and and like nutrition plan. And it wasn't like eating like a monk and hemp smoothies and salad sandwiches. It was just like a sensible, but they even sort of had a takeaway night and things like that. So it was like an achievable one. And all of them, like I said, I can't remember if it was sort of blood pressure or diabetes, but all of them, all their sort of numbers sort of dropped right into the safe zone. And all they did that was for 6 or 12 weeks. And you think that is absolutely incredible. The amount of money that would have saved the NHS, the amount it would have helped them, because now they've, exactly as you said, they've got a toolkit now to kind of live for the rest of their lives. And they know how to fix the problem, rather than a tablet, which sort of technically, yes, it's going to put a plaster over the issue, but it's still going on in the background. You know, it's the same as like sort of like a steroid injection. I'm not a big fan of them sort of generally, because all it's doing is it's masking the pain. It's not sort of solving the issue. So then you go back and have another one and then another one. But then once you've had your maximum amount, then you're screwed. And it's the same with this. So but like I said, I don't want to give sort of GPs and the NHS a bad name, but I do think that people like us are not looked down upon, but we're not seen, because we're not all sort of doctors. We haven't got sort of degrees and that and PhDs. But I think we could educate like sort of GPs, which sounds really sort of patronising, but how effective a strength and conditioning program could be for Auntie Doris down the road, who's 80 years old. We could make her life a lot better, where they wouldn't really sort of send them to us, or we wouldn't get involved first. And I think we've got the whole sort of world of strength and conditioning can offer a lot more in society than it is at the moment.
100%. I mean, I had a chiropractor on a while ago from the UK. He was a firefighter as well, and he was talking about strength and conditioning in the elderly. And you think about it, you know, a nursing home should have a gym. And that sounds bizarre, but I mean, seriously, yes, there are going to be people that are coming in that are already bedridden and, you know, maybe some, you know, in chair or something. But yeah, if you want to stop the full risk, there's a lady I'm literally about to put her episode out today. She does vestibular training, where you get on this, it literally looks like you're standing on a record player and you're turning, and it's resetting the vestibular system in your ear, and vertigo and some of those things start to improve. And she's actually in talks with a nursing home company at the moment to put those in, because you know, you want to stop hip fractures and some of these other things, strength train. You want to stop osteoporosis, strength train. We know that calcium alone doesn't work. So yes, it needs to be this conversation. And what blows me away in the UK, having grown up in, you know, I was born in the 70s, so I would argue it was the NHS was still doing really well back then, and it was how it was supposed to be. If you have a tax-based system, your goal is to make the people as healthy as possible. So you save that tax money for childbirths and traffic accidents and, God forbid, cancers and some things that we all chip in and help fellow British people. But if you allow your nation to become fatter and sicker, you're destroying, I would argue, the best healthcare system on the planet, because you're not actually understanding that the way it works is proactively making sure that everyone else is as healthy as possible.
Yeah, and I mean, I'd like to start by, like, because my mum and dad, as I say, they've both gone, and the NHS were amazing with them, and they had sort of illnesses. So this isn't a blanket sort of, I don't want to start sort of bashing the NHS. However, I think it kind of needs sort of fresh eyes. I'm not in the government at all, so this is a really sort of like an idiotic kind of like a view, but it just needs sort of input from other people. Where at the moment it's that because they're so short of money, that seems to be a lot of the priority, and they're doing the best they can with what they've got. Where I think if you add people are a lot sort of cleverer than me, but like sort of leads in strength and conditioning and leads in nutrition, who are sort of doctors in their field and been there and done it, even like someone like a sports coach who was really successful, and get all this input from people and say, yeah, we could have a look at that. We could have a look. I mean, it's, again, reducing it down to a small example. And back to the fire service, we have a big issue of slips, trips and falls being like a really high sort of cause of sickness at work. And I went through the stats the other day, and we have a big percentage of our accidents are sort of ankle-based in injuries. And relating it to old people, what a thing that would sort of stop that is reaction time. So it's not only like the exercises in the gym, but the quicker that you can react and put your foot out to support yourself, it's going to sort of save your knees, it's going to save your ankles. So so I'm trying to build sort of something now where whether people are take it up and whatnot, it's not sort of squatting and benching and things like that. So it's not as sexy as that. So I'm not sure how many people are doing it, but there is a science behind to kind of reduce that. So sort of ramping that up for the elderly, for example, that's why they get a lot of shoulder injuries and hip injuries. It's because when they do sort of take a fall, they haven't got the reactions to put their hands out and things like that. So even to something as basic as that, there is sort of something that can be done. And there's a lot of amazing sort of physios who probably sort of do try, but it should be a campaign. It's not always about the big sort of medical conditions. I think we could make a massive dent in a lot of issues that are affected when we're elderly. I read a book the other day, and he wanted to do a decathlon at 100. Now, he didn't mean an actual decathlon, but he wrote down sort of 10 things he wanted to do when he's 100 years old. One of them was getting up and down off the toilet. One of them was sort of bending down, getting up on his kind of knees and getting back up again. And 10 sort of really sort of basic things like that. So all his training from like sort of the age of 35 and 40 onwards was geared to kind of do that. Obviously, when he's younger, he's doing it to the extreme. So getting up and down off the toilet, he's doing loads of heavy, sort of like a squats, for example. But as he gets older, so that's going to get tapered down. So he's doing the same sort of movement, so he can get up and down off the toilet, but it might just be up and down off of a chair or something like that. And I thought that was a great way to look at it. That's the target, as you say. It's not to be an athlete really for the rest of your life. It's to make sure that you function in life, that you can play with your grandkids, that you can sort of not have a heart attack at the age of 50. They should be the long-term goals. Frustratingly, though, you only realise that when you're in your 40s and 50s and 60s, when you think, oh, crap, I wish I started to do that. I always compare it to yoga because I've only done it a couple of times, but I wish I did that as a teenager because now I'd be in a much better condition. But when you're a teenager, that's the most sort of boring thing in the world, and nobody sort of wants to do that. So there is a problem with what is deemed as normal and cool and things like that. And I don't know how you get over that. But the earlier you start to think of, I want to be a functional sort of 80-year-old, I think it could save in terms of the job wise. We'll be sort of working longer, which we are anyway, but in a better condition. And like I say, sort of doing things as a pensioner should be the goal, because that's the most important thing, really.
Absolutely. I'm going to put a bowl of chalk and wrist wraps in my toilet. People are like, what the hell?
Yeah.
I'm going to PR today. All right. Well, that being said, let's go back to your journey within the fire service itself. Where did you find yourself assigned once you came out of the academy, and then what kind of environment was that? Was it urban, suburban, rural, etc.?
So it was my first station was Burton, which is near where I live now, and it was perfect. So it's probably a bit of all of that, really. It was mainly, I'd probably say it's mainly urban. Yeah, it's kind of like a bit of both. So there's lots of farmland, but it did have some quite sort of dense sort of towns and cities as well. So it wasn't a massive area, but there was a good sort of mix. So as a probationer, it was kind of perfect. We had such a range of jobs. The environment, I think, was the best it ever was. And again, you sound like an old fella saying this, it's not what I used to, but it was. So I was probably after the proper old school sort of firefighters, when they're playing sort of volleyball all the time and things like that, and going out and having sort of bars on stations and things like that. Although the station I was at had a bar, although it was kind of obviously sort of shut down, but there was still sort of pictures on the wall, and there was still a couple of the old guys who would sort of tell sort of stories. So although I never sort of lived that side of it, I was on the end of it, which was amazing, and the camaraderie and the characters. Over the years, that it's a bit more sort of clinical, and I think it goes down to even the stations that are being replaced. They're a bit more sort of hospital-like, and they're a bit more standard sort of new builds, where the old ones had, even like down to the poles, and it was all a bit more sort of rustic, I suppose. So it must have been a nightmare as an estates sort of manager, but as a firefighter, it was great because all the buildings had this sort of like kind of character. So the area was great. The upbringing in the fire service was amazing. Then I moved to a station called Tamworth at Tamworth, which was a bit sort of different, so a bit more of a modern station by the time I went there. But that was like a boat station, so that was quite fun. So although at Burton I had the Alp, which is like the aerial sort of ladder platform, which was amazing, which is my favourite sort of special. Then we went on to rope and water. So that means doing, which I'm not a massive. The older I got, I hated the water, if I'm honest, and that's one of the reasons why I left there, because sort of swimming in the rapids in the middle of Wales on training days and things like that in dry suits. It wasn't my favourite time in the middle of winter and things like that. But at least it made it a bit more sort of varied. It wasn't just sort of house fires and car fires. We used to go to these sort of funny jobs. So then my last few years operational went back to Burton. So by that time, the old Burton station had been sort of knocked down. So it was like sort of full circle. And again, it was good going back there, but it's, I don't know how to put it because it makes it sound like a negative thing. I'm not even saying it's a negative thing, but the atmosphere is different. And there's a lot, it seemed like there was a lot of older guys who got old kind of like together, when now there just seems to be loads of young people. And because crewing has been sort of cut as well, like the numbers aren't as big. There's a lot more sort of young people, a lot more sort of newer people. And the atmosphere is different, I suppose. I don't want to say it's worse, but like when I started, there was crews of between sort of 12 and 16, and now you're riding a truck with 4 people sort of sometimes. So like the atmosphere is different in a big old sort of station. It does make a difference only having sort of 4 people there and everyone sort of bomb bursts. It's a bit of an odd, and that was one of the reasons why I went for this job now, was because it wasn't the same, like essentially. And yeah. That sounds like a moan, but I didn't mean that.
No, not at all. I mean, it is an observation. I mean, my favorite crew was 20 years ago now, you know, so yeah, I can totally relate. When you reflect back, before we go to the transition into the strength and conditioning side, through the career that you had operationally, what were some of the career calls? They can be big events, or they could simply be moments of kindness and compassion.
There's quite a few, to be fair. I think there was, there was a few sort of wow sort of moments where, and again, you don't really realise it at the time, but I remember once, so one of the main roads through the Burton area is called the A38. It's quite a busy, sort of like a fast road, and I wasn't a probationer, so I was out of that, but I was still probably about 5 or 6 years in. And there was a car had flipped over on the other side of the road, sort of upside down, and crashed into this poor other car that was kind of minding its own business, but so basically hit it head first. And there was probably 7 or 8, well, there was more than that casualties, probably about 10 sort of casualties, and 6 or 7 of them were dead as we arrived, basically. And that was probably, even though I was in 5 or 6 years, that's probably the first big job I had. So it was those, and it probably only took like a second where you pull up that you don't know where to start. And frustratingly, there was an off-duty paramedic, because obviously over here it's a bit sort of different. We're trained as trauma care, but we haven't got the qualifications that you guys have over there. Because is it every sort of station you're a paramedic, firefighter, or is it only?
Yeah, most, apart from the Northeast, tends to still have them separate, but most of the country you're going to be firefighter, EMT, or firefighter paramedic, right, which is the higher level of those two.
Right, yeah. So we're not like that at all. We got a basic level of trauma care, but our basic trauma care is to hold them together and patch them up until the ambulance come, really. So we were the first pump there with an off-duty paramedic, and it was like, well, where do you start? We had sort of 5 people on the truck. But it was like I consciously remember sort of glancing out and seeing a few sort of bodies and things, and I was in my head was like, fuck. But it was like sort of 2 seconds, and then right, it's game time, and then you just sort of get into it. So the ones like that sort of to stick out. There's other bad ones where you're, in like a car accident, for example, and you're holding someone's sort of neck still while they're getting sort of cut out and things like that, and you're talking to them and making conversations to take them, and then you find out sort of later that they died and things like that. So there are a handful that is stuck in my head. However, and I don't think this is a good or bad reflection of my personality, but I was quite good at compartmentalizing it. I've never really, I kind of have moved on pretty quick, and that sounds really harsh, but it's only now when I'm kind of out of that bit of a job, we watch these sort of ambulance programs and rescue programs, and then I say to my wife, "Oh yeah, I've been to a job like that. I've been to a job when someone was decapitated and things like that." But I haven't thought about that for 15 years. But it's just when I see it, and Mrs. is like, "What, really?" And you're like, "Yeah." And it's not come back to me. So whether I'll have a breakdown in 20 years' time, I don't know. But I've tend to cope quite well with it. But on the flip side of it, there's some amazing jobs, and and again, this doesn't sound sort of great to the public of anyone who's outside the job, but the amount of laugh that you have on a job, even if it's a relatively bad one, which kind of sounds horrific and sort of distasteful, not on sort of fatalities and things like that, but the amount of banter that was sort of knocking around, and especially if you put up to a job that's on a neighbouring with a neighbouring sort of like a station, so it's not only your crew. There's other people there that you might not have seen for a few weeks or months or even sort of years, and you're like, "Hi, Mark, how you doing?" And you sort of catch up. That kind of I don't like the word; it's a bit kind of cheesy, but like the brotherhood, it is a real thing, and it doesn't ever go away. And that, I don't think you can find that anywhere else. I think it is only in the tactical sort of sectors. And I may be sort of a bias, but like the police and the military and the fire, I think that's where it's sort of really unique. And the relationship between those three as well. Not so much the military, obviously, we didn't have any contact really with the military, but there's obviously a crossover with the police, and there's a bit of Mickey taking sort of both ways with that in like a light-hearted way. And that, I think that's something that I won't ever sort of take for granted, and I don't think, and that's the hardest thing I think that I'm finding hard to replicate in now, because essentially what I do is an office job or a gym-based job, so I'm not on sort of stations in a watch environment every day and things like that. So that's the thing I miss the most, and that's the thing that I'll always have with me, really.
What's interesting is I never struggled when it came to the mental health side. Don't get me wrong. I had lows. There's no question. I went through my divorce. I was a single dad working, being forced to work extra shifts. That was brutal. But, and so I've always asked the question, well, why not? I am by no means any more special than anyone else who's towed the line in a uniform. So what is that thing? Something happened along the way that allowed me to be slightly different than someone else. And through all these conversations, a common denominator seems to be that even if people had traumatic experiences when they were younger, and most of us did, which is what led us to uniform in the first place, if those were just pushed down and left unaddressed, it becomes a fracture to your foundation. I think, more often than not, that's actually the origin story to a lot of people struggling in the military and first responders when they do, whether it's a psychedelic journey or just simply a therapy session. But what I saw is growing up in a farm in England with all the horrible shit that happened, including almost dying in a house fire myself at 4 years old, there were so many elements that we know are healing now. I grew up on a farm. We had, real food. Grew up around animals, horses and dogs and things that we know heal now. I was uncomfortable. I got dirty. I mean, we had a giant kitchen table that we'd make fun of each other, which is just like the firehouse. So there was all those things that allow me to offload. That's the only difference between me and so many of my friends that have been there with the pistol and the bottle of whiskey. When you look back now, are there any elements of your upbringing that you think allowed you to process the horrible shit that we see, when some of our men and women struggle with that?
That's a good question. I don't know. I suppose again, it sounds a bit sort of backwards, but the freedom, although I never sort of needed it, my mum especially was sort of super sort of trusting. And I remember, this isn't a great thing to say in public, but when I was I'll say I was 17 and a week away from my 18th birthday. That might be a little while, but my mum sort of worked at a school, so she sort of photocopied my birth certificate and changed the year, so I'd be a year older, so I could get into pubs and things like that. There's not many mums, which is sort of a super cool / legal thing to do, but my mum was kind of like that. But because of that, I never really rebelled. I was quite a good kid, I sort of towed the line and things like that because I didn't have all the restrictions kind of put on me. I had that freedom. I never felt the need to kind of rebel, and having that kind of upbringing. But on the flip side of it, if I needed to speak, I would, and we were really honest with each other, sometimes sort of painfully honest and things like that. So that was, I suppose, is the nearest thing, in that we had a big family, but there was only a small amount of us who kind of saw each other really. And whether this is getting a bit sort of deep now, but like I watch now sort of Christmas films and things, and you see like big families of 20 people all around having banter, and I kind of envied that all my life really, because we got quite a small family. So I love that environment. The amount of times I was sat around a table and I wasn't even in the conversation, but you're glancing around at these sort of 10 blokes and laughing and joking and taking the mick out of each other. That was like my happy place. And I think that's, if you're comfortable in people's sort of company, it's not always talking about the event that helps. I think it's just being in a relaxing where you can take your mind off it a little bit and you can just talk about absolute sort of rubbish, and whether it's sort of football or whatever. It doesn't always mean, because I think a lot of people, they misunderstand when they say you get a bit of counselling on sort of station, sort of with your watch or with your crew. It's not, it doesn't mean that you're analysing the job that you've been on. It just means that half an hour of having a brew and talking about absolute crap, but that kind of, it kind of puts you in a happy place, and then you're ready to go again. It doesn't mean that you analyse the job and go the ins and outs. I should have done this. I'm glad I did this. I went in it. Shame. It's kind of like the opposite as well. And I think that kind of family environment, that kind of group sort of team environment, if you like, is what I enjoy, and that's where I feel the most like at ease. So that's probably the closest sort of link from my upbringing up to the job.
Is it that same element that was there in your early station that you missed when you went back and it was a new station and a smaller crew?
I think so, yeah. And that's what I was always sort of craving for that again, but it never quite reached. So I started on an amazing watch with loads of super clever people in terms of the job, and so operationally, but super, super funny and loud and things like that. And then there was another crew, like once, because obviously sort of people retire and things. And then there was another one exactly the same. They were a bit more sort of my age, and that was more of like we had a proper laugh. Everyone was on the same page. But I'd probably say, it sounds horrible, so apologies if anyone has worked with me over the years, but probably, so I'm 20 years now. I'd probably say from 8 or 9 years onwards, that was when it changed, when sort of watches started to bombast and people were leaving, retiring, or moved sort of stations or whatever. I never found that again. And that's when like I say, when I say the shine's coming off the job, I don't like to ever sort of moan about the job. But for me, it kind of lost all the best bits weren't as good as they were, if that makes sense. And a lot of the changes, a lot of it mainly down to the crewing and the changes in our day-to-day sort of work role, it wasn't the same. So again, I'm not saying it's good or bad. It lost its shine for me, and that's when I started to get a bit of itchy feet, really.
So you reflect back and you look at what worked, and not talking about mental health at all obviously was a bad part of 20 years ago, but I would argue that, working out as a crew, training as a crew, shopping as a crew, and then all that banter where political correctness really wasn't a thing back then, was very healing. And now you look at, that conversation that everyone's offended about everything in certain areas, which I think is very dangerous. I like the South Park mentality, just make fun of everyone so no one gets offended.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But then, the devices, the individual dorms, which are such a good idea for sleep, but you have to then make sure that you stay in the communal areas as much as possible so you don't lose that camaraderie. And then you said the gallows humor, the dark humor, that has to be part of what we do. And I think that, if you saw, we were talking about young people revisiting earlier, if we were able to refine that element in the modern fire service, I think the need for peer support and some of these other things would go down, because that is the ultimate peer support. The kitchen table I had as a young farm boy and the firehouse table of Station 1 in Anaheim back in 2006, 7, that was our therapy, just like you said. That and the shopping and the sports and the training and the loading hose at the end, that was all micro therapy sessions.
Yeah, and I'd probably say, and speaking for myself, I was probably the best at my job at that point as well, in terms of I was at optimum sort of keenness, if that's a word. I was sort of switched on. We were all sort of helping each other. I was, I wanted to be a sponge and learn everything. As soon as that sort of side of it started to kind of drop, I was never lazy, but I kind of stopped sort of striving to learn that extra bit. I stopped sort of striving to get better and better and better, and I felt like I could do the job sort of comfortably. I'd seen and done sort of most things. I felt sort of confident. I was never sort of out of touch with what I can do, but I lost that sort of drive. And some people don't sort of reach that point, and they have a 34-year career, and they're absolutely sort of smashing it. And good luck to them. But for me, I felt like that was part of the job for me, was that side of it. It wasn't sort of just putting out the fires. It was all that. So when that started to erode a little bit, it affected like my whole sort of outlook on the job. And again, that's on me. Again, I'm not saying it's a good or a bad thing. And if anyone who was ever sort of worked with me saying, "Oh, that's why you were crap," but I was, but it was, I lost that kind of. I'm not using the word drive because I was never, like I say, it makes me sound like an idiot, but I wasn't ever late. I didn't ever sort of struggle, but I was never the same. Those first sort of 8 or 9 years, it wasn't the same essentially.
Well, I think it goes also to what we're seeing now, where, and I'm not saying this is the case in any of your stations at all, but to use an extreme example, where there is toxic culture, and I've experienced this, especially the last place I worked. When I was in Anaheim, when I was in, one of my favorite departments, I couldn't wait to get to work because I knew that whatever we saw, whatever horrible shit, whatever, hoarder home with disgusting conditions, and the daughter's now inherited the home and the mother's rotting in a bed in the middle of the room, whatever nasty stuff you had to respond to, you knew that there was going to equally and oppositely be this camaraderie, this banter, all that stuff. But then you go to those same calls and then you go back to the station, you're almost like don't want to go back because you got to deal with this, a-hole in your station or whatever it is. Now you don't have that positive outlet. So there is, it's such an important conversation that's starting to gain traction now is, if you don't have a good culture in your fire department, that is so dangerous as far as the mental health of your people. And then, like you said, then the desire to even be a fired up firefighter, because people probably just want to get the hell out of there as soon as their shift's done.
Yeah, it's interesting actually. Yeah, because I never really thought of it that way, but I think I had a similar thing. It wasn't necessarily a bad culture, but the job was changing a lot. So I joined at a time where there was so many sort of changes, and not only sort of cuts to numbers, but in terms of what we had to do sort of day to day, it was a lot more sort of tracked and scheduled, and you had sort of minimum targets of fitting smoke alarms and school visits and things like that, where it got a lot more sort of regimented. They basically sort of didn't want you to have much sort of free time. It all had to be kind of filled sort of doing community work. And that was roughly at the same time. So like I say, it wasn't the toxic culture, because I think generally we're not too bad in staff. Obviously there's the odd individual, but I think because the job was changing, it wasn't the job that I joined. So God knows what the people who joined sort of 10, 15 years before me, it was even worse, because that was like the prime days then, when all you did was do sports and train and things like that. So I think it's all tied into one. I don't ever think there's one sort of reason. I don't ever think there's a right or wrong. But I do think as culture change, as the job changes, you kind of have sort of two choices. So when I got to 17 years ish, I was sat round once and we were sort of moaning about something really tiny, and I can't remember sort of what it was, but I had like an out of body experience, and I thought, I've got a choice now. I've got sort of however many sort of years left. I've got 17 left now if I stay till sort of 60. But I got a choice of turning into a grumpy old sort of firefighter who kind of moans about when the toilet roll sort of changes and things like that, or I could sort of try sort of something new. So I thought, if I had sort of 5 years left or something, I think I would have just sort of stayed a grumpy firefighter and just sort of have seen it out. And I think you've got that sort of, and I don't think that's especially specific to the fire service as well. I imagine that's every kind of walk of life of a job, and you got a choice of sucking it up and just sort of seeing your days out, or making a difference. And I didn't want to be a moany person, because I felt it in the probationers that they would come in, and I was always as good as I could be with probationers and as positive as I could be and things like that, where some older guys would be sort of, I wouldn't sort of trust doing the job sort of crap and things like that. And I hated that. You shouldn't be saying that to a probationer, because you've got to kind of make them feel as welcome as possible. I don't think that helps anyone. If you're telling them how bad the job is, I don't think that's a good way to go. So I was never sort of like that. But little things like that, I'd clock and I think this ain't right. And so that's when you think, I've got a choice to make here.
So what was it that you chose? What were the options that you had to get out of the station full time?
Well, it came out of the blue, really. So for a few years before I came off watch, I was a PT, in terms I did like the annual sort of fitness testing for the service. So there's me and a group of others. and we'd just do the testing, and then we'd sort of send the paperwork off to the fitness advisor, and she'd sort of log it all and do all the research and things like that. She sort of left the service, and then so the service advertised for a 6-month sort of temporary while they find someone else. Does anyone want to do the job for 6 months? So I ummed and ahed for ages, and I thought, well, a bit like becoming a firefighter, I thought I'll give it a go. I'll apply for it. I probably won't get it, and then we'll see what happens. So I went for it, and I got it. So I thought I'll do it for 6 months, which was scary because going from 224, because whether we'll talk about the shifts, because I know you're sort of super passionate about the shifts.
A little bit.
So we did our standard whole time is 2 days and 2 nights and 4 days off. So going from that, all my life and all like my kids' life in terms of school runs and all that, everything was built around that. To go into a 9 till 5, that was the scariest thing in a weird way, because it meant a massive sort of like a change in my life and the way that we do things around the house. So I thought I'd give it a go, and pretty much I'd say from day one, it was like a light bulb went off my head, and I felt like a section of my brain that had been asleep for so long. I was super, and because that's what I'm going back about being sort of keen in my early years. So I loved the job when I first got it. I wanted to learn everything. I was up really, really late and blah blah blah, and I didn't consciously know that went. But then when I started this, that sort of awoken again, and then I realised, God, I was going through the motions a bit on the last sort of like a couple of years, because I haven't sort of felt like this for years. So the 6 months turned into, then it got extended for 3 months, then another 6 months, and it just went on until it was advertised sort of permanently. So I was temporary probably for 3 years in short sort of contracts that were sort of non-stop, if you like, but technically it was a short term, and then it's only been in the middle of last year that I was actually made sort of permanent.
Did you have any observations once you came off shift of your own health when you were in your own bed every night?
100%. And again, I wasn't conscious of it until I came out of that environment, but I slept a lot better. I wasn't as grumpy. I wasn't as sort of generally fatigued, so not even sort of sleepy tired, but I felt like, when you're a bit kind of like a groggy, and I've found that got worse as I got older in terms of like the night shifts. So as I say, doing the 224, when I was younger, I'd go in for the 2 nights. I might not sleep much, and so I'd have 4, but it wouldn't matter, and I'd finish at 8 o'clock in the morning. And my 4 days off were all off. I wouldn't go back to bed. It was absolutely fine. The older I got, I might have to go to bed for a little bit. The older I got, I have to go a little bit more. And it probably, by the time I left, I probably need the first 2 days that were off to kind of recover until I was sort of back to normal. But yeah, 100%, I felt a million times better. But again, I didn't realise how bad I was until I was out of it. And you kind of, when you actually, and that's where I totally agree with where you're going and like the mission that you're on, because I just think it's killing people, and it's even if it's not sort of killing people sort of directly, it's affecting people's home life and their health in general. So even if it's not sort of sending them to a grave for everyone, although I believe it will do for some, it 100% affects. It needs to be thought of. It can't just be, especially as now, and again, I presume in America when you do the 24-hour shifts and things, or 48 hours or whatever, obviously you've got beds. Where we haven't got beds anymore. There's a couple of the brigades left, I think, in the whole sort of country. So we do sort of night shifts with sleeping platforms, they call. So you can kind of bring in unofficially camp beds, and people sort of put sort of cushions together and put sort of chairs together for downtime, is what they call it. Everyone knows what's happening, but officially there's no beds. So people just sort of play the game a little bit, and that is even worse because you're not even getting. Not that you slept well anyway with beds, but you're not even getting the proper sleep now because you're on a camp bed.
See, it's funny with this push. There's, you always got the people, oh, they're going to go back to 12s then, careful what you wish for and all this stuff. And like, well, no, because the science shows that 12 hours that go from days to nights are awful because your circadian rhythm never is set. With the 24, your day is day, your night is still night. It just, you're probably going to be up during the night. But then, as you said, now you've got these recovery days in between after every single shift. But I've just been talking to another department, and the same thing. They took all the beds out, and they're on 12s. And if they went to 24, they are an anomaly because they're a 42-hour work week. Everywhere else around them is 56. Who's doing a 24/48? So if they just simply changed to 24-hour shifts, they would be able to turn around the recruitment, because they would be the only place that had this shorter shift now. But despite the fact this is a shorter work week, people don't want to work those 12s. So they'd rather do a longer work week where there's a 24-hour shift. And I think even operationally, so many of us have so many things to do as far as checkouts and training and workouts and, as you said, public education and testing hydrants, that, there's so much that we're responsible for. You need a longer shift. And so that way, when you're done with your full day, then you can actually go to bed. And then obviously you're going to wake up. But this opposition to sleep, people say, well, you get paid to sleep. Yeah, but so do pilots, so do truck drivers, so do, air stewardesses, so do, people on cruise ships. Like, there's lots of people that get paid to sleep. Our military, you pissed off that we're not at war constantly? What do you think they're doing at night? They're sleeping. So this whole, facade that we need to keep firefighters busy all the time and don't let them rest, it could not be more opposite from what actually needs to happen. So, I don't know if there's a need for it, but I feel that if the British Fire Service really wanted to make a massive positive change, the 24/72, not to mention if you do work in London, for example, that's only 1 day in 4 that you need to actually make that commute now.
Yeah. And there's loads, because I always, exactly, I've had the same sort of conversations with people about sort of sleeping, and it's kind of like a joke, especially from your mates who aren't firefighters. All you do all day is sleep. And one, you have to stop saying no, we don't. But then I've stopped trying to argue it. But what I do say sometimes is, okay, then your house is on fire. Would you rather that I've had sleep or not have sleep? So you would want me sort of rested, surely. Even if I was sort of sleeping, which I'm not, that's only going to be a good thing. And what can you do at night anyway? You might be able to go to the gym, but you're not going to go out and test hydrants at 2 a.m. You're not going to fit a smoke alarm. No, there isn't anyone who's going to want to knock on the door from the fire service at 2 a.m. to fit a smoke alarm. And then they say about like the ambulance or whatever, for example, you don't get to sleep. But that's a bad thing. We shouldn't all do a bad shift just because somebody does. We should all be aligned and all on the same page. I totally agree. I'm not, ambulance drivers are horrifically, they're even worse in a way because it's non-stop and they're always sort of working. They don't get any downtime. But doesn't mean we should all match those shifts. We should be helping them as well. So it drives me, we had a dabble, probably not our service, but there was what we had called LARS sort of systems, which was similar. So low activity stations, sort of tried 24 and 48 hour shifts. There was not a bad word about it. The bad side came about like things like sort of leave and like the admin of it. But for me, all that is superficial stuff that would because it's a big change. Obviously everyone goes, oh my God, it's a change. But then after sort of 6 months, it would become the norm anyway. But yeah, I don't get the reluctance to even sort of try something for a few months because it's going to help everything in financially for the service. Say if you did the 24, so we have a lot of detachment. So if someone is short, then you might get sort of sent to another station if your watch is up one day, for example. So if you do at the moment, so on a 4 day of a shift pattern of 2 days and 2 nights, you might have to send somebody there and they come back. You send another person the next day and they come back. If you did it, so you have to pay for like sort of travel there and overtime there and travel there and back and overtime for there and back. If you did 24 hours, that would only be twice. You're there and then back. Yep. But at the moment, over a 24-hour period, you could be doing it sort of 2 or 4 times. So there's loads of benefits that I think are short-sighted from services, and it might not work everywhere, but it might do. And the benefits of it working massively outweigh sort of what's happening now. And the knock-on could be incredible. So I think you should be really sort of proud of what you're doing. I think it could be game-changing.
I mean, there's definitely a revolution happening here, and there are people that have gone on 12s that have gone on 24 in a couple of places in the country, and then the rest have gone to the shorter work week, 24/48 was they were working, and now 24/72. Where the conundrum is with police, with dispatch, with ER doctors and nurses, ambulance, like you said, is again, it's rest and recovery. So if you look at what's happened in the corporate space in the UK, they did. I'm sure you saw the news. There was a big test where a load of big progressive corporations tried a 4-day work week, 4-day civilian work week. So they worked Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. Monday to Thursday, 9 to 5, and then they had Friday, Saturday, Sunday off. They had the same level, if not higher, of productivity, efficiency, and much higher innovation because people were like, all right, well, I got to get this work done in 4 days now. How do I streamline this? And yet they had a happier, healthier workforce using less sick days because they had this 3-day weekend. So for our, professions where it has to be 12s, ER, physicians, etc., then why are we not having the conversation of giving them more rest and recovery? Not the 24-hour shift for them, because it is a
Exactly.
different dynamic, but why are they working, 40, 45-hour weeks? Why can, if Google can work 32 hours, why can't, the person driving the ambulance and the medic in the back be working a shorter work week because we're asking them to stay up throughout the night? So I think there's an opportunity to look at the 12-hour work weeks of the people that you just physically cannot make do 24 hours and go, okay, well, then how can we give more rest and recovery and up the staffing for those professions? So as you said, when they respond to your 3-year-old who's in anaphylaxis, that paramedic is going to be able to get the drug doses right and save your child's life.
Yeah, definitely. And I think there's enough evidence, not only academic evidence, but academics of other organisations, and whether it be in the fire service or out, where it has been trialled and it is working. So why not? Why don't we learn from it? There seems to be such a slow. It's like sort of swimming in Marmite, especially in the fire service. They're just sort of so reluctant to kind of make a change. And I always just sort of say it where I am now, because one of the first things I did, because I was kind of new to like a middle management kind of role, I'd analyse everything in terms of like I take a policy or procedure that I'm sort of like directly responsible for, and I'd ask, well, why are we doing that? And if there's a reason for it, then great, and can we improve it or whatever. But if they aren't, but a lot of the time the answer was, I'm not really sure. It's just we've always done it. And to me, that isn't an answer. And that's the same with everything. If nobody knows why we're doing something, it needs to be kind of looked at. You don't just have to stick at doing something. Otherwise, we'll still be sort of going to fires and horses and shit like that. There's a reason why things change. So everything, and there's, although the upheaval for certain sort of like a shifts can be, but like I say, I think we should learn from other places and give it a go. If the worst happens and whatever happens, there's 100 house fires, everyone sort of burns to death, there's 20 heart attacks, or we're not getting to kind of jobs, guess what? You can always go back. I know it'd be a pain, but that is always an option. So I don't know why everything, it just seems like it's sort of stuck in two worlds, I think. And again, I can only really speak of the fire service because I know more about that than like the other services, but it seems like we're moved away from the heavily sort of like a traditional, and there was a big sort of link from the military, and it was quite sort of rigid with the boot polish and things like that, and everything was inspected with a finger and a white glove when the gaffer used to come around on the truck and all that. We've moved away from that, but now we're in a bit of limbo where we're not 100% in the modern world either, and we're kind of clinging on to this. So we've got to learn, we've got to progress in every sort of section of it. And it kind of needs to be someone's sort of job to go through it, maybe even like an external person who's not sort of precious about the fire service and not sort of precious about anything else, and can say, well, what is the best for that organisation? And if that's the case, then why aren't we doing it? Well, at the moment, there just seems to be a lot of people holding on to things for no real reason.
Yeah. I mean, I've used this analogy many times, but the American fire helmet is the perfect analogy for that. You can see over my shoulder there is the schematics, and the American fire helmet's on there. It's 1937. So, right. And yet people still think that that's what makes them a good firefighter. No, it's not. It's actually an awful piece of equipment. And as we've said many times, the Navy SEALs don't wear tin hats. They have the latest, greatest gear, and then the American fire service will ridicule the British fire helmet. Oh, it's a space helmet, whatever. But it's better. Like I wore the East Coast helmet most of my career, the West Coast helmet, which is smaller. When I went back to the East, I kept banging my head on everything because the smaller helmet I was used to. But yeah, the moment we have an extrication, the helmet comes off, put it on top of the car, just bailout videos where the guy's doing the ladder bailout and the helmet comes off first. So obviously if they let go of the ladder, they're going to, basically land on their head. But it's this kind of narcissistic arrogance that's what makes you a firefighter, because it's how you look, versus, like you said, letting go of that, being proud of that being one of the rungs in the ladder of the fire service history, but leaning into what is the latest, greatest, because that's what we're there to do, to save other people. So I want the latest helmet with the torch built in and the comms in my ear and the ergonomic elements, so I'm not getting hung up on all kinds of shit if I'm climbing through a collapse. I mean, it makes perfect sense. And it's the same with this work week. We pick and choose the innovations that we want, so rather than going, all right, everyone in every area, what are the best things? And when it comes to the work week and sleep and that kind of thing, this is glaringly the obvious thing. You don't even need research. It's a shorter work week, more recovery, more time at home. It's going to equate to higher levels of performance, more intact relationships and longevity in their health. So the resistance is coming, really, like, I mean, you're saying with the fitness standards and people opposing it, I see the resistance coming from people that don't want to do their job as a leader.
Yeah, 100%. And the problem is, I don't know what the answer is, and it tends to be there's a lot of people who have enjoyed the best bits of the job over the years, and they've got sort of like promoted, and they're the ones who are either reluctant to change or are making changes that are better for the organisation in terms of stats and figures and all that. And you think you wouldn't have said that 10 years ago when you were on sort of station either. So there tends to be a lot of things. The only thing I'd say about the helmets, I like the old ones because of when it rained, because the rain would sort of scoop off. Where now on the helmets we got now, which are tight, it goes right down your neck. But that's the only thing I'd like to keep from the old helmets.
All right, and that's what I said to the Americans: like, we don't have to have the European helmet. Make one even better.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Listen to the Americans, listen to the Spanish and the French and everyone else. But all right, what don't you like about it? Well, the rain. All right, well then invent something even better. But don't keep. You go to these trade shows and it's the same helmet, and then they're in these like, you're in a trade show, aren't you supposed to bring innovation? Like, this isn't a fucking museum. So
exactly.
I don't get it. Anyway, moving on. All right, well then talk to me about fitness at the front line.
So so it's taken a few forms over the years. So I started it when I was on the trucks, and it was just online coaching basically. And because of the shift work, the shift pattern, I had a lot of work to work on it, and I've worked with clients. People come to me, say, I want to join the fire service, or I'm in the fire service, I want to improve my fitness. How it's kind of morphed over the years, especially now I'm in this role, because I'm busier now in terms of, like, it's a 9 till 5 and longer hours. I've kind of moved away from like the day-to-day of online sort of coaching, and I've got again, it's not arrogance, but I've got like a bigger view of it now. So I kind of want to build something a bit more sort of tangible and substantive. So I'm trying to going down more of, like, not necessarily a lot of the academic route, but because I'm like a policy nerd and like a research nerd without having the background in terms of having a PhD and 100 degrees and all that. So I'm still sort of learning. But I try and spreading the word of tactical fitness to people who wouldn't normally do it. So, for example, I've been a guest sort of lecturer at a few sort of unis over here on sports science courses. So basically to advertise that there's other ways to utilise sort of strength and conditioning in sports science other than just sort of joining a sports team or joining the NHS or whatever, and how important, because over here the term sort of tactical sort of fitness isn't as well kind of known as it is in the States. So it's something I'm trying to grow over here. It's something I want to get more involved in, sort of, as I say, sort of academically. I'm involved in a few sort of research sort of projects, always as a support. I'm not high up enough in terms of running the research kind of yet, but that's my plan. I'd like to do sort of papers on different areas, and whether it's sort of like reducing injuries and reducing, helping out sort of for firefighters in general. But yeah, so it's kind of morphed into doing talks and presentations and seminars on that for people who want to know more, and how it can sort of reach into everyday life a lot more than kind of what it is. So it's something I'm kind of passionate about. Where it's going, I'm not really sure, to be honest. So I'm not really here to plug anything, if I'm honest. I just want to sort of speak to as many people as possible and learn from as many people as possible, and see if I can sort of help develop sort of something and work with people to kind of push the industry a little bit sort of forward. And there's a little sort of group of us. So I'm part of also like the National Firefit Steering Group, it's called. So there's like it's not really a governing body, but there's a big sort of guidance sort of body called the NFCC over here, which sort of oversees and gives sort of guidance on everything. It's kind of like to do with the fire service. And a subgroup off that is this sort of Firefit group. So it's the equivalent of me. So I'm the fitness advisor for Staffordshire. So all the fitness advisors from all the countries as academics in the group, sort of lecturers as operational people. And we sort of plan of what, how the future of fitness, right down to fitness tests and standards, is going to sort of look like over the next sort of few years. And there's a group of us within that who are really keen to kind of do that and progress it. And it's just an interesting way of trying to push things from the inside and seeing sort of where it leads, because I think it's always kind of growing. There's always research sort of coming out, but I think in the UK especially, we're quite behind. So it's just being a part of that really, and trying to do what I can, trying to work with as many people as possible.
Beautiful. Well, I want to throw some closing questions at you before I let you go, if that's okay.
Yes, yeah.
All right. First one I'd love to ask, is there a book or are there books that you love to recommend? It can be related to our conversation today or completely unrelated.
Oh, good question. I should have prepped. There's a couple of probably normal books, but quite inspiring books. So one of them is random, is Arnold Schwarzenegger's autobiography. I know it sounds ridiculous, but his kind of story is crazy, sort of where he's come from and what he's done. And it's not going down his political sort of roots or anything like that, but it's kind of like about his sort of work ethic is super, super inspiring, really. And going down the same route of sort of David Goggins. I love his stuff. I mean, he's absolutely batshit, but he's so inspirational to, we can't and shouldn't do what he does. It's not necessarily, I don't think it's particularly healthy what he does. However, his sort of mindset is kind of super inspiring. As soon as you sort of read a book of his, you're like, right, game on. I need to kind of, it kind of spurs you on. In terms of, I should have prepped this really, but I read a lot. So I listen to a lot of books, but I'm also a big fan of podcasts. So there's a few people I listen to, but it's more, I think the biggest sort of secret is taking views from people from different fields. So like my main job is health and fitness and strength and conditioning. And I do sort of listen and watch a lot of stuff. However, it can be a sports sort of podcast or book. It could be like an entertainer. It could be, someone like a Joe Rogan, for example, on his sort of podcast, like the weird and wonderful. It doesn't always mean that you agree with everything that's on there. And your podcast is a good example without sort of blowing smoke. But it's the most interesting conversations sort of sometimes I think start with people you don't expect. So I think it's just being as wide as possible and taking in as much as possible. And that doesn't really answer the question. And I'll probably, as soon as we hang up, I'll probably think of 10 books that I've read that I'd hand over. But that's the best I can do at the moment. Apologies.
No, it's great. Thank you. I appreciate that. All right. What about films, documentary, television?
Oh, another good one. Films, I think, is a range. I think there's the cool films that everyone says. But I don't think there's anything wrong with a Rocky. I don't think there's anything wrong with sort of turning your brain off. I don't really want to be educated when I watch a film. Do you know what I mean? I want to be entertained. And I think a lot of people get a bit sort of snooty about films. But I like anything with most sort of comedies, and biopics as well. I watch a lot of them. But TV, it's weird with TV. I watch a lot of TV, but I can't say anything I particularly like. My favourite of all time, randomly, is West Wing. I love that. And I've watched I like the series a few times, but then I do like the British comedies. I'm a big fan of Ricky Gervais and things like that. So probably sort of stand-up comedy is what I watch a lot of. And I think he's done. I like his outlook on life, and as we're sort of talking about what you can and can't sort of joke about, I like the way that he presents it, how he explains that we should be able to joke about anything really in the right sort of environment, obviously not on CBBS, but on, so a lot of comedy. I watch most things really.
I love that show he did where he lost his partner. I forget what it was called now, but it was about death and grieving, basically.
Oh, Afterlife. Yeah, it's
so
amazing.
Good.
Yeah,
so good.
Yeah, really good. I think it's things like that. You watch it and on the face of it, you think it's a comedy, but it's so sort of deep and meaningful. And I always call it's the same as sort of Derek as well. Have you watched that?
I think I started watching that, but I don't think I made it through. But that might have been when I was on shift, and when I was on shift, I would fall asleep in the first 10 minutes of a lot of television.
Yeah. But it's not as watchable as that, because you got to get past the comedy. It's really funny, but there's some really deep and meaningful things in it, and it's a bit like The Afterlife. It's hilarious at some point. It's kind of like perfect TV, but then the next time you're on the verge of crying and things like that. So I love things that sort of play with me. I love things where I don't know where it's going as well. So sort of films that you're watching, you're thinking, I have no idea how this is going to end. So like sort of no Country for Old Men. I know it's a few years old now, but it just kind of ends at the end and things like that. And although at the time you're like, that's not an ending, but I kind of like that when it's not a cheesy sort of everyone lives happy ever after.
Absolutely. All right. Well, the next question, is there a person that you recommend to come on this podcast as a guest to speak to the first responders, military, and associated professions of the world?
Oh, good question. I think there's a few. So I'm trying to think. There's a couple that I would recommend because I find them interesting, and they're both from the academic field. But one was a fitness advisor for fire service, but now he's in the University of Bath. His name is Rich Stevenson, and he's a top bloke. And like I say, he's worked in the fire service, but now he's an academic, and he was the person who kind of worked on the research project that built the fitness test over here. So he'd be a great person to kind of speak to. He's done a lot of work with a bloke called James Bilson as well. And he works with him at Bath Uni, and he's currently doing massive sort of projects with the military and reducing MSK injuries and things like that. And a couple of little sort of shout outs. There's two people I know quite well. One's called Warren Hart. So he's the exercise physiologist at North Yorkshire, and Liam Knoll, and they're both doing so. Liam Knoll, for example, he's just devised as part of his sort of PhD a return to work a process, and that's going to be sort of rolled out sort of nationally. And Warren Hart's doing a lot of work with female firefighters and things. So although it sounds pretty boring, they're kind of like the people who are trying to push things forward from the academic side, which I kind of think we need a mix of that and the practical side, obviously. But I know you said one name, but there's probably four there.
No, brilliant. Yeah, it's funny. I'm from Bath originally, just outside Bath. So
right, okay.
Yeah, that's my hood.
It's beautiful there.
Absolutely.
All right. Really a hood. It's quite middle class, isn't it?
Yeah, it's not a hood at all. All right. Well, then the last question before we make sure where everyone can find you. What do you do to decompress?
Good point. I find that very hard. That opens up another conversation. My missus always on. I find it hard to turn my brain off. I suppose it's being at home. It's going in the gym. I suppose the only time I'm not thinking about anything is when I'm out and about with the wife and the dogs, or I'm in the gym. It's the only two times. Generally, I find that is something I kind of, again, it's going down a rabbit hole, a bigger conversation. But when I'm watching sort of TV, even, I find it hard to switch off, and mine's always thinking about sort of different sort of projects. So, but the gym is probably that's the only time when I've got the music in my ears. I'm not thinking about anything else other than how sort of weak I'm getting as I get older. But yeah, so gym and dogs, I suppose, is the answer.
That's pretty much my answer too, so I totally get it. All right, well then, for people listening, where can they learn more about you, reach out to you online, and then what about fitness at the front line?
So there's two main ways. So the main way at the moment is on LinkedIn, and on that I'm just Mark Pearce, TSAC-F, because I'm a strength and conditioning facilitator with the NSCA. So that's on sort of LinkedIn. On Facebook, it's just my name. It's just Mark Pearce. And Fitness for the Front Line is mainly run through Instagram, and it's called that. So if you give that a search, you'll see sort of my ugly mug. But if anyone sort of wants to reach out, even for a chat, as I say, I'm not sort of pitching anything, but I just want to work with as many people as possible. So if anyone sort of needs any sort of help with projects and things like that, I'd love to get involved.
Beautiful. Well, I want to thank you so much. It's been such an interesting conversation. Obviously, we took tangents when it came to strength and conditioning and tests and, all the other things that we've discussed. But it's been such an amazing conversation. So I want to thank you so much for being so generous with your time and coming on the Behind the Shield podcast today.
Thank you very much. Thanks for your time and patience. I've really enjoyed it.